North Korea was not going to be the case where they were going to prove that dialogue can solve these problems. So they focused on Myanmar and Burma and Iran. And the Iran deal is sufficiently flawed and controversial that I think it will make the next administration even more careful about North Korea. I actually see the Iran deal as making dialogue even less likely, because it's going to be nothing but bad news that comes out over the next few years on that. So, I'm not satisfied with the policy. I think the phrase strategic patience and so forth sounded great. We were really impressed for a while. Doesn't look so good now that North Korea is, moving to the point where they will probably demonstrate on the next administration's watch that they can mount a nuclear weapon on the Musadam or other ballistic missile, maybe their own. That, by the way, will demonstrate why the current kind of strategic patience and self-confident approach is not going to work. There's going to be a major crisis of confidence in the U.S. extended deterrent. And it's going to require the next administration to do very new things. I heard John Henry talk a little bit about South Korea, but Japan too. The kinds of things we do with NATO, and plus some, in terms of strategic nuclear coordination and thinking about how to restore deterrence. And that, by the way, is going to put more pressure on China. And so I don't think the current policy is going to be satisfactory at all for the next administration. You asked about second track. Look, Joe DeTreni is probably collecting some excellent analysis right now from this trip. And if I were in the government, I want to know what Joe thought. I think some of the other people in the delegation are more interested in selling dialogue. But certainly what people hear from this meeting in KL from Han Sung-yeol, who's a real smooth operator, will be interesting. I think it's appropriate that the White House and the State Department are saying they have nothing to do with it. Because although I said there may be a time and place for some low-level dialogue, maybe as a sweetener for China in the way Larry says, right now I would completely have nothing to do with it, because we need to be lockstep with Seoul. And the Korean position is no dialogue right now, and they're right. And so I wouldn't do anything to in any way complicate that. Even this trip alone is making so much buzz in Seoul that the progressive camp now thinks, ha, we were on the right side of history, the Americans are going to change, they're going to have dialogue with North Korea. I really don't think so. I think that's completely wrong. So the new administration should be extremely careful not to even suggest they're moving ahead of Seoul on dialogue, because the Korean position right now, I think, is right.
Thank you. General Chen?
First off, thank you for your insightful analysis. Let's just say the Republic of Korea were to lean towards dialogue despite all of its downsides.
You mean after 2000?
Well, maybe tomorrow. What if they did that? And what if they opened the Kazan industrial complex and or conducted a new series of sunshine policies? How would the United States, do you think, would react to that, both on the Republican and the Democratic side?
So I'm kind of breaking out in a cold sweat right now because it's bringing back memories of the Nobel era, where we suffered enormously from President No's statements. In fact, the Korean government under President No generally, in terms of policies, didn't deviate much at all from us. We negotiated quotas. Korea sent the largest contingent to Iraq after the U.S. and Britain. Korea renegotiated bases and implemented Pyeongtaek, whereas with Japan, we're still where we were on Okinawa. Japan sent 600 troops to Iraq, and it was hugely celebrated. I asked Lee Jung-suk, who was the Secretary General of the NSC, who I liked personally a lot. We worked well together. I asked him, why don't we do something to celebrate the fact that Korea has sent the third largest contingent, the Zaitung Battalion and a brigade, to Iraq? And he said, no, we can't do that. I said, why? And he said, because President No has told his base that we had to do this so that the US wouldn't attack North Korea with nuclear weapons. And so the narrative, the actual policy, I used to joke that the US-Korea alliance was like what Mark Twain said about the music of Richard Wagner. It's not as bad as it sounds. And Ambassador Vershpow, and everybody started stealing that line from me, but on substantive policy issues, we were actually pretty well aligned, but the narrative being spun out of the Blue House was really pretty disastrous for us. Because frankly, it emboldened Beijing to think, you know, when the US and Korea are divided, or when Japan and Korea are divided, China has a home field advantage in Asia. And so I'm breaking on a cold sweat, because if we have a progressive government, or even I can imagine scenarios where even a state-of-the-art government might go in that direction, it'd be pretty tough to manage. The most important thing will be to try to, you know, as the poor administration is now with Duterte in the Philippines, try to do everything you can to minimize the sense that we're diverging strategically. You know, if it's something like Moon Jae-in and the progressives come in, it will be different, but I think someone like Moon Jae-in, who was chief of staff and saw what happened to Roh Moo-hyun when he turned against the alliance initially, I think he'd be very careful about this. You know what happened? Moody's downgraded South Korea's sovereign bond rating. Why? Not because of the North Korean threat, but because of the US-Korea alliance, which is a sort of assumption investors have about stability on the peninsula. So a variety of things happened that Moon Jae-in saw, and I think he would, or someone like him, would tack in a different direction, but be very careful about the US-Korea alliance part, which is, by the way, quite strongly supported in the polls in Korea now. And Donald Trump notwithstanding, pretty, at least as far as the polls go, pretty well supported by the American public. So, you know, cold sweat, but we have to adjust and try to show as much solidarity as possible.
Dennis?
Thank you, Michael, for your presentation. I had one question. I mean, I agree with what you said. Dialogue is better than no dialogue, and you might find certain things out. But you did point out when you advocated that North Korea has never engaged in negotiations without having the pot sweetened, whether it's heavy fuel oil, Banco Delta Asia money, or light water reactors, et cetera, food aid. So my question to you, isn't what you're saying a non-starter in that you say there should be no offer of any gift, bribe, aid, whatever you want to call it, for talks, but do you really think North Korea would ever engage in talks without some sort of economic incentive?
Yeah, so two answers to that. One is, all right, fine, no dialogue. I mean, I just think we should be, fine, no dialogue. We're prepared under the right terms. So I think it'd be a mistake to say we'll never do dialogue, basically. We'd be open to it on the right terms. Those are not the right terms, fine. We now know where North Korea's intentions are. The second thing I would say is I think, I was tempted to do a Donald Trump we were talking and say, because I'm pretty sure, and others here maybe have a better memory than I do, but I'm pretty sure when we met in Beijing at the Diaoyutai guest house in March 2003, that North Korea showed up under duress. The oil was cut off. The Chinese, we were in that guest house while Marines were pulling down statues of Saddam Hussein in Baghdad, and the television was on in the lobby. And so the coercive power at that point of the US was really intimidating. We lost it in Mosul and Fallujah and other places later, but at that point the coercive power of the US was quite terrifying to the Chinese too. And that's when the Chinese temporarily cut off oil. And the head of the Chinese delegation in those three-way talks turned to the North Koreans and said, if you continue on your current path, it will lead to the destruction of your country. It was very, very tough. China's toughest I've seen them. It may be, there were one or two exceptions, perhaps, maybe the other one maybe is when in April 1994 when there was a sense that perhaps we'd use force. There may be some exceptions when force seemed to be on the table, but you're basically right. And if the North Korean position is, or if the Chinese tell us you have to provide some sweetener, then fine. We don't have to have the talks.
Rachel?
Hi.
Speak up louder.
Yes. So very interesting conversation. I guess my question then is that change the calculus in terms of things you were saying about negotiations are a waste of time and we should have very low expectations of them, and we should look to use more sanctions on North Korea and improving our extended deterrence? I mean, what does the decreased timetable for North Korea that can threaten the U.S. homeland mean for this strategy, which I'm thinking sounds like more strategic patience?
So, I hesitate only because a lot of people, including me, argued that if North Korea ever tested a nuclear weapon, it would completely change Japan, South Korea. It didn't as much as I think most experts expected. So that's a threshold that should be absolutely jarring to us and to the region. I only hesitate because it's not 100% guaranteed. There's this boiling frog thing with North Koreans where every new provocation, even though the heat comes up, we don't notice because, frogs, when they get boiled, I'm told, I never did this as a kid, just slowly let themselves get boiled to death because they can't feel the heat increasing. So there is that dimension that North Korea has quite skillfully introduced into this. But I think that will not be the case. I think that more likely this will be a threshold that will be profoundly different in terms of our alliance relationships in the American public. The Musadong could range Guam, probably. They haven't had a successful test, but if they go for what they want, it will range Guam. So that means for the first time, North Korea would be able, in your scenario, to put a nuclear warhead on American territory. And with the Taepodong 2 programs and so forth, on track to hit the American homeland within a decade or maybe less. I think the American public would not be complacent about that at all. I think that Japan, which of course would be well within range of Musadong or Nodong, would have a fundamentally different view, and that the ROK would too. So I would, in that scenario, look for Japan to request capabilities for surface-to-surface missiles from us, to start talking about changes in the 3 non-nuclear principles, which is no possession, no basing, and no transit. I would look for Japan to say, we want to change that. We want you to deliberately transit tactical nuclear weapons on your submarines and things through Japan. I think in the ROK, we had a good discussion with John Henry that there would be, I think we would be in an era where we would have to take steps to tighten our, we don't use tactical nuclear weapons the way we did in the 80s, or planned to use them in the 80s when the deployment of Pershings and so forth in Europe was necessary to restore confidence after Soviet SS-20s were deployed. We don't, the US doesn't use nuclear weapons in those ways, but I think there would be pressure to start thinking, not like Chung Jun, necessarily my senpai from SAIS, but to think about demonstrations of tactical nuclear war fighting, and dialogue and even coordination and operational cooperation to some extent with our allies. So it'd be that's the kind of thing we'd have to be prepared for. The other aspect of it is, if it's a Clinton administration, what happens to sequestration and defense spending? And this is partisan, I guess I'm in the right place to say this, but I sure hope the Republicans hold the Senate, because if you have a Democratic Senate, it's going to be a heck of a lot harder, even with a North Korean nuclear test, to keep defense spending up, to modernize our nuclear, the whole triad. But that would be, so there would be some pretty consequential things. China would not like it. But as we were discussing earlier, that probably, if we're prepared for some tension, not war, not conflict, but some tension in the relationship, probably would be a healthy thing if we're going to get China's attention on the North Korea problem.
Thank you, Rachel. You have 3 persons. Please, question only. We are running out of time. Peter?
Peter, I'm a pre-analyst and former diplomat. I think the Kaesong thing, that ship has sailed.
Yes.
South Korean businessmen lose millions of dollars, and it's a huge cash infusion. I'm pretty much a regime change guy, but I do wonder about the possibility of certain ping-pong diplomacy efforts. For example, things where the threshold is so low that it would be hard for them to say no. Swap vaccines from the Korean Vaccine Institute for folk art or socialist realist art from North Korea. No cash changing hands. I've written about the possibility of a science agreement with North Korea, where you combine the border ecological studies in the DMZ with PLETCU, a seismology study, and 5 or 6 others. Why not a massive sort of science program? Is that something that the 2 countries or even the 3 countries could pull off together as a sort of very low threshold ping pong diplomacy?
Thank you, Peter. Grace?
Hi, I'm Executive Director of Corean-USA, which is created by North Korean defectors. My question has to do with one of your comments, which I was happy to hear. You mentioned unification as something to be excited about. Well, I would like to ask about the possibility of having the U.S. forge a one Korea policy among the nations of the world. There are 193 states in the General Assembly, and I can't help but think if we would expend more energy, more diplomatic effort on all the other countries that are not sitting in the Security Council and that do not have the ability to veto what we're trying to put forth, I wonder if that would be a valid and logical step to take. And I say that knowing that in the early years of the General